"Who is Malcolm Reed, CEO?" Lauren Bennett asked it in a room where every screen had just turned red. Nobody answered. Across 12 states, 4,200 trucks had stopped mid-route. GPS feeds froze. Warehouse gates stood open with nothing coming through them. Federal medical shipments sat on the shoulder of interstates while drivers called dispatch and got nothing back. Every minute of that silence pushed Pioneer Freight Network closer to something it might not survive. Grant Keller's million-dollar consultants crowded the terminals, talking over each other, and not one of them could explain why Northstar Core had locked the entire national network. Then a line surfaced under the error logs. Route authority required. Malcolm Reed. Lauren read the name twice. A young technician finally spoke from the back. "He worked in the basement," and another voice quieter. "We fired him 30 days ago. If you want to know what happens when a company throws away the one person holding it together, stay with me and hit subscribe because we tell one of these every week." At 10:03 on a Monday morning, Grant Keller pointed at 41 names glowing on the auditorium screen and said, "By noon, none of these people will have access to this building." The sentence landed harder than the list. No explanation, no warning. 41 careers reduced to white letters on a black slide under a title that read, "Pioneer Forward." Malcolm Reed sat in the back row with his arms folded, his name 17th between a warehouse scheduler and a payroll clerk. Grant adjusted the cuffs of his gray suit and smiled with the calm of a man who had already convinced himself that cruelty was a form of efficiency. "This company has carried outdated systems and outdated habits for too long. Apex Meridian Consulting will rebuild our operations with modern tools and modern thinking." His eyes moved across the room without landing anywhere. Sentiment cannot become strategy. Beside Malcolm, a young technician named Caleb Ross leaned in. "They don't even know what you do," he whispered. Malcolm kept his eyes on the screen. "That makes this easier for them." Caleb waited for the anger. Malcolm didn't give him any. He had learned a long time ago that powerful people treat emotion from the powerless as evidence against them. So he sat still while Grant talked about lean infrastructure and clean accountability, words that sounded impressive until you translated them into security escorts and canceled insurance and parents doing arithmetic about next month's mortgage. From the third row, Lauren Bennett watched with a tight expression. She had approved the restructuring 3 nights earlier after Grant assured her every department head had reviewed the list. He had called it painful but necessary. He had shown her a model proving Apex Meridian could take 23% out of operating costs inside a quarter. What he had not shown her was a single face. What he had not told her was that nobody had asked the basement support team what would stop working once they were gone. When it ended, people rose slowly. Some were crying, some were furious, some were already on the phone to a spouse. Malcolm waited until the aisle cleared and Grant, coming down off the stage, nearly walked into him. For a second, the two men stood face to face. Grant's eyes went to the Navy support polo and the barcode badge. "Facilities issues go through the temporary help desk now," he said, mistaking silence for a request. Malcolm looked at him evenly. "I know." Grant had already turned away. At 10:42, a junior HR coordinator named Melissa Crane arrived at Malcolm's basement desk holding a folder she was too nervous to keep still. "Mr. Reed, I'm sorry." She started over. "Security will meet you at noon. Your system access ends at 11:30. Severance and health coverage information is in here." Malcolm glanced at the folder and did not take it. On the center monitor of the 3 in front of him, a maintenance alert had come up from the national routing platform. A warehouse code in Oklahoma was failing to reconcile against a manual dispatch rule. It was a small error, the kind no executive would ever see, because Malcolm usually cleared it before it climbed high enough to be seen. He moved the cursor toward it. Melissa swallowed. "I was told you can't make any changes." "It takes 30 seconds. Mr. Keller's office was very clear. Malcolm looked at the warning again. Left alone, it would not break anything today, probably not tomorrow either, but it would sit in there waiting until something else moved against it. He took his hand off the mouse. "Then I won't make any changes." Melissa exhaled, relieved by his cooperation, with no idea what cooperation was going to cost. By 11, 2 Apex Meridian consultants had come down to the basement wearing matching lanyards and the easy confidence of men arriving to replace people they had never met. Their lead engineer, Owen Price, was younger than Malcolm, sharply dressed and loud enough that every sentence came out sounding like a conclusion. He stood behind Malcolm's chair and scanned the monitors. "This is the legacy support station. One of them, Malcolm said. Owen laughed. 3 screens for password resets. Malcolm said nothing. Owen clicked into a shared folder and frowned at the layered routing rules. This architecture is a museum. Half these conditions probably haven't fired in years. Malcolm turned slightly in his chair. Some conditions exist so that they never have to. That's exactly the kind of thinking we're here to eliminate. Grant appeared in the doorway as though summoned by the sound of agreement. Any resistance? Nothing we can't clean up, Owen said. Grant looked at Malcolm. You understand the transition team needs full access. Full access to what? Grant's mouth tightened. It was the first question Malcolm had asked all morning, and Grant did not like how simple it was. The infrastructure. Which part? All of it. Malcolm held his eyes a moment. Then you should know what each part does before you take it out. Owen smirked. Grant stepped closer. This is how companies get trapped in the past. Every old employee believes the system collapses without him. The basement went quiet. Caleb stopped packing his desk. Melissa looked down at her folder. Malcolm's expression did not change, but something behind it hardened. Sometimes the system doesn't collapse because somebody kept it from collapsing. Grant gave him a cold smile. And sometimes people confuse maintenance with importance. Lauren had come down looking for Grant and caught that last sentence from the hallway. She stopped outside the open door. Malcolm saw her first. Their eyes met. She did not recognize him. To her, he was another support employee standing beside a half-packed box. Grant turned and his voice softened instantly. Lauren, we're completing the handoff. Is there a problem? No problem. Just the usual difficulty letting go. Malcolm looked at the woman who had signed the document ending his job. She looked tired rather than cruel. It was not much of a distinction from where he was standing. She glanced at his box and then at the photograph beside his keyboard. A girl with bright eyes and 2 missing front teeth in a wooden frame. I'm sorry this transition affects you, Lauren said. She meant it. It was still the kind of sentence you say to a person whose name you do not know. Malcolm picked up the frame. It affects more than me. She seemed about to ask what he meant. Grant stepped between them with a tablet in his hand. We're late for the vendor review. She let herself be moved along. Malcolm watched them go, then looked back at the alert still blinking on his screen. At 11:29, his access disappeared. The monitor went black before he could close the open diagnostic window. At noon, Leon Brooks came down from security. He had worked that front desk for 15 years, and he looked angrier about it than Malcolm did. They really doing this? Looks that way. Leon reached for the box. Malcolm shook his head and carried it himself. They walked through the lobby and conversation dropped as they passed. People who had relied on Malcolm for years found other places to look ashamed of how relieved they were that their own names had not been on the screen. At the glass doors, Leon stopped. This place is going to miss you. Malcolm looked back once. Not up at the executive floor, at the elevators going down to the basement. They'll miss something, he said. Outside, the cold came off the Denver street and hit him in the face. He put the box in his truck, sat behind the wheel, and looked at the photograph of his daughter. Then his phone buzzed, an automated Pioneer alert, one he should no longer have been receiving. Routing exception, unresolved. Secondary failover pending. Malcolm read it twice. His thumb hovered over Grant's number still in his contacts from years back. He could call. He could explain that the error Owen had waved off was tied to something much larger buried deep enough that no consultant was going to find it until the ground had already opened. Then a second message arrived. User access revoked. Malcolm lowered the phone. 9 floors up, Grant Keller was shaking Owen Price's hand and calling it the cleanest transition Pioneer had ever run. In the basement, on a dead screen, the warning kept blinking. The first routing failure showed up 3 days later, small enough to laugh off. A truck carrying hospital supplies pulled into Bay 12 in Colorado Springs instead of Bay 4, and the crew unloaded it by hand in freezing rain. Owen Price called it a harmless data mismatch. Grant Keller called it proof that Northstar needed modernizing. Nobody called Malcolm. At his house in Lakewood, Malcolm stood over a pot of spaghetti while Sophie sat on the counter, swinging her feet, studying him with the careful eyes of a kid who can always tell when an adult is hiding something. You're stirring too hard, she said. He loosened his grip on the spoon. Am I? You only do that when you're mad. I'm not mad. Sophie raised one eyebrow. It was her mother's eyebrow exactly, and it got him every time. Maybe a little, he said. She had already seen the cardboard box by the hallway closet, the coffee mug, the old notebooks, the photograph. She had not asked why his badge was in there with them. She waited until they were sitting down. Did something happen at work? Malcolm looked at her, then at the envelope stacked by the refrigerator. Lying would buy him one evening and cost him 9 years of her believing what he told her. They let me go. Sophie stopped twirling her fork. Because you did something wrong. No. Then why? He looked for an answer that would not teach her the world was fair. Sometimes people make a decision before they understand what they're deciding. That sounds stupid. It can be. She was quiet for a second. Are we going to lose the house? That one went deeper than anything Grant had said all morning. Malcolm reached across the table and put his hand over hers. No, we're going to be okay. He said it firmly enough that she believed him, and then he sat at that same table until 1 a.m, working out exactly how long his savings would hold. At Pioneer, Denise Harper was doing a different kind of arithmetic. She had processed 40 of the 41 severance files without trouble. Malcolm's would not reconcile. His department record showed 8 years of service. Payroll showed 12. She assumed a clerical error, and to clear it, she opened the oldest folder attached to his employee number. A scanned acquisition file from Blue Trail Technologies, a small freight startup Pioneer had bought 12 years ago. Inside was an intellectual property agreement attached to a patent filing for Northstar Core. The author line read, Malcolm James Reed. Denise sat back from her monitor. She checked the employee number. It matched. Date of birth, address, tax records. All of it matched. The quiet man Grant had written off as outdated support staff had signed away the rights to the system that controlled every route, every warehouse assignment, every load calculation and emergency override in the company. The agreement included a settlement, guaranteed employment, and a confidentiality clause that prevented either party from publicly naming him as Northstar's creator. Denise read it until the words stopped resolving. She thought about Malcolm kneeling under executive desks to reconnect cables while people held meetings over his head. About managers blaming him when a printer jammed and forgetting him entirely when a server came back up. She also remembered what Grant had told her during a compliance dispute 2 years ago. You process the paperwork, Denise. You don't need to understand the strategy. Her first instinct was to call Lauren. Her second was her son's first tuition payment due in 5 weeks. She printed the file, slid it under a stack of expired parking permits in her bottom drawer, and told herself she needed more proof. Meanwhile, Apex Meridian was cutting into Northstar with both hands. Owen's team replaced routing tables, pulled out manual checks, and deleted conditional rules they had decided were redundant. Their Friday report celebrated a 21% reduction in technical debt. Grant forwarded the number to Lauren with one line. Exactly the progress we promised. That same afternoon, a driver named Harold Finch sat for 52 minutes outside a closed warehouse in Amarillo because Northstar had assigned him to a dock that had been decommissioned 2 years earlier. Monday, 2 trucks received the same shipment code. Tuesday, refrigerated medicine bound for Omaha was routed toward Tulsa before a dispatcher caught it. Wednesday, a gate in Nevada refused 37 valid manifests. Every failure got contained. Every explanation sounded reasonable on its own. Together, they made a shape Lauren could not stop seeing. She started keeping a handwritten list in her desk drawer. By the end of the second week, it had 7 entries on it. Grant waved it off in a private meeting. You don't rebuild a 12-year-old platform without turbulence. Apex is surfacing problems the previous team buried. Then send me their nightly stability reports. Of course. Send them to the board as well. Grant's expression moved for less than a second. Lauren saw it. That could create unnecessary concern before we have context. If the system is stable, context helps you. He smiled. The smile did not get as far as his eyes. I'll arrange it. That evening, Denise found something worse. Apex Meridian's vendor paperwork listed a parent company, Walsh Strategic Holdings. Principal owner, Trevor Walsh. She knew that name. It was in Grant's emergency contact record. Trevor Walsh was married to Grant's older sister. There were no competitive bids attached to the contract. A compliance flag had been raised and then overridden from Grant's office 2 days later. Denise stared at the screen with her pulse in her throat. This was not poor judgment anymore. She printed the vendor record and added it to Malcolm's file. Then she folded a piece of paper and carried it up to the executive floor. Lauren's assistant had gone home. The hallway was empty. Denise set the note in the middle of the desk. Ask who built Northstar Core. When she stepped back into the corridor, the elevator opened. Grant was standing in it. His eyes went from Denise to Lauren's dark office. Working late? Denise made herself not look back. Severance files. Grant held the doors with one hand. Stay in your lane, Denise. The doors closed between them. Lauren found the note the next morning, read it twice, and set it beside her list. Before she could do anything with it, Northstar produced its first serious event. A routing loop trapped 63 trucks between conflicting distribution orders across Kansas and Missouri. Dispatchers spent 4 hours untangling it by hand. Lauren went down to the operations floor and found Owen. What did you change? We simplified the failover sequence. Reverse it. Owen hesitated. Not cleanly. The old logic was undocumented. Then why did you remove it? Grant answered for him. Because leaving obsolete code in place is how a company becomes a hostage to former employees. Lauren turned. Which former employee? Grant paused, half a beat too long. I was speaking generally. That night, Malcolm saw a trade article praising Pioneer's transformation. Grant was quoted saying the company had finally stopped depending on outdated people and outdated systems. Malcolm locked his phone and looked out the kitchen window. That face again, Sophie said from the table behind him. What face? The one where you already know something bad is going to happen. He looked at her worksheet instead of answering. At 6:40 the next morning, Northstar Core failed nationally. One screen froze in Denver, then another, then every route across 12 states stopped updating. Warehouse gates rejected incoming trucks. Dispatch queues doubled, vanished, and came back corrupted. A wall map that should have been a river of green lights turned red in under 90 seconds. Lauren arrived to phones ringing, coordinators shouting, and Owen's consultants clustered around terminals they no longer understood. Grant followed her, repeating the words temporary and contained. How many trucks? A dispatcher swallowed. At least 4,200. The room went quiet. And then the line appeared across the central display. Route authority required. Malcolm Reed. Lauren stared at it. Who is Malcolm Reed? Nobody answered until Caleb Ross said it from the back. The man we fired. 30 minutes later, Lauren was driving toward Lakewood with an address on the passenger seat, and that red map burned into the back of her eyes. Behind her, federal deadlines were expiring one at a time. She reached his street just after 8. It was a quiet block of small houses, and 12 states were waiting on orders that were not coming. She parked behind a silver pickup and sat with both hands on the wheel, trying to build a sentence that did not start with what the company needed. Every version she came up with made her feel worse. When she finally knocked, Malcolm opened the door in a faded flannel shirt with a dish towel over his shoulder and the guarded look of a man who had expected some kind of trouble, but not this one. Ms. Bennett. Malcolm, I need to talk to you. Behind him, Sophie appeared in the hallway holding a cereal bowl. Malcolm glanced back at her, stepped out onto the porch, and closed the door gently behind him. Northstar is down, Lauren said. Nationally, more than 4,000 trucks stopped. Medical freight food shipments, federal contracts, 12 states. His face did not change. I saw the alerts. Then you know how serious it is. I knew it was serious before your consultants touched it. Lauren took that without defending herself. The system is asking for your authority. The system remembers me better than Pioneer did. I'm asking you to come back. He looked at her, and the silence sat heavier than anger would have. 30 days ago, your company put my name on a screen, shut off my access, and walked me out before lunch. Nobody asked what I maintained. Nobody asked what breaks when I'm gone. He shook his head slowly. Now the people who decided I was disposable want me to save them. I didn't know. That's not an excuse. It's the truth. Not knowing who keeps your company alive is the failure, Lauren. It was the first time he used her name, and it sounded less like familiarity than like a verdict. I have a daughter inside that house. I have bills, no insurance, and a job search I didn't plan on. Pioneer made its decision. I'm making mine. There are drivers stranded who had nothing to do with that decision. For the first time, something moved across his face, and Lauren saw that she had found the one argument capable of reaching him and hated herself for reaching for it. Don't put those drivers on my porch, he said quietly. You had 30 days to think about them. He stepped back. I'm sorry. Then he closed the door without slamming it. Lauren stood under the dripping porch roof and felt the whole weight of Pioneer settle onto her chest. By the time she got back to Denver, it was worse. 2 federal medical shipments had blown their first deadlines. Dispatchers were routing by telephone, but warehouse crews could not verify manifests without the system, so trucks were being parked at rest areas indefinitely. Grant met her by the elevators. Did he refuse? You knew he might matter. I knew he was support staff with a long access history. That doesn't make him indispensable. The system is asking for his name. Grant lowered his voice. Machines retain old credentials. Don't turn a technical artifact into a mythology. Lauren looked past him at the red map. 4,000 trucks are not a mythology. She walked away before he could answer and went straight to human resources. Denise was still at her desk, pale and upright, as if she had been waiting all week for that door to open. Lauren shut it behind her. You left the note. Denise's hands froze over her keyboard. Yes. Tell me everything. Denise hesitated. Lauren set Malcolm's badge on the desk. She had pulled it out of his inactive personnel file before driving to Lakewood. He refused to come back, she said, and I think he was right to. I need to know what we did. Denise opened the bottom drawer and took out the folder. Lauren read the acquisition agreement standing up. Halfway through, she sat down. Northstar Core had started as Malcolm's code. He had built the original routing engine at 26 before Pioneer bought Blue Trail Technologies. The confidentiality agreement had erased his authorship in exchange for guaranteed employment and financial security. 4 years later, after his wife died, he had moved into a quiet support role so he could raise Sophie on predictable hours. His title changed. His knowledge did not. Lauren turned each page slower than the one before it. Did Grant see this? I don't think he ever looked. Malcolm was a salary line inside a reduction target. Denise slid another document across the desk. But he knew about this. Lauren looked at the vendor record, the ownership disclosure, the name Trevor Walsh. His brother-in-law. Apex is controlled through Walsh Strategic Holdings. Grant approved the contract with no competitive bids. Compliance flagged it. His office overrode the flag. Lauren's anger cooled into something harder. Why did you wait? Denise looked at the photograph beside her monitor. Her son in a graduation gown. Because I was afraid. Grant transferred the last person who challenged him to a facility in Bakersfield. My son starts college next month. Her voice caught. I kept telling myself I needed more proof, and now 4,000 drivers are paying for how long I took. She pulled out one last page. An emergency recovery amendment signed 6 days earlier, after the errors began but before the national failure. If Northstar entered a prolonged failure state, Apex would become Pioneer's exclusive recovery provider for a fee north of $30 million. Lauren read Grant's signature twice. He set himself up to profit from the collapse. I can't prove he caused the first outage, Denise said, but he made sure Apex owned the way out of it. Lauren stood. Send copies to my personal account to Rebecca Sloan as board chair and to outside counsel. Do not use Pioneer's internal mail. Grant will find out. Let him. Lauren came back to Lakewood a little after 9 that night. Malcolm opened the door before she knocked twice. I said no. I know. She was not holding a contract or a check, and there was no one in the car, just the folder. I came back to apologize before I ask you for anything. Malcolm studied her. That sounds rehearsed. It isn't. I approved a restructuring without knowing a single person inside it. I trusted Grant because trusting him was easier than checking him. I let a man reduce you to a line item and then I signed under it. She held out the ownership records. Apex belongs to Grant's brother-in-law. They drew up a $30 million recovery contract before the system went down. I think the first failures were incompetence. I think somebody intends to make sure it stays broken. Malcolm read the amendment under the porch light. The exhaustion went out of his face and something sharper came in behind it. How long has the core been down? Almost 15 hours. Then you've got under 18 before the failover archive seals itself. After that, it isn't a repair. It's a rebuild, and a rebuild takes months. Lauren did not ask how he knew. Can you stop it? Maybe. Dad, Sophie called from inside. Malcolm looked toward the door. For a long moment, his whole life pulled one direction, and several thousand strangers pulled the other. I'm not going back for Pioneer, he said. I understand. I'm going back for the drivers and the dock crews and every person Grant never planned on seeing. They drove into Denver without speaking. When Malcolm walked into the operations center, the room stopped. Owen looked up from a terminal. Who is this? Lauren answered. The man who built the system you broke. Malcolm sat down, pulled the logs, and started typing. Inside of 4 minutes, his expression changed. You took out the manual override sequence. Owen stepped closer. It was redundant. It was the alarm. There was no documentation. Malcolm looked up at him. I was the documentation. And you fired me before you asked the first question. Owen's face tightened. Lauren raised a hand before he could answer. Give him everything he needs. For the next 4 hours, Malcolm moved through Northstar like a man walking through a burned version of his own childhood home. He knew every corridor. But walls had been taken out, doors sealed, alarms cut because somebody had decided they looked unnecessary. Lauren stayed beside him while the noise slowly drained out of the room. Consultants stopped offering theories. Dispatchers lowered their voices. Even Grant, standing behind the glass wall with his arms crossed, seemed to understand that the floor now belonged to the man he had thrown away. At 2:47 in the morning, Malcolm found a new dependency buried under Apex's emergency patch. It did not repair the damaged failover sequence. It waited for the failure to deepen and then handed control of Northstar's routing modules to an external license server owned by Walsh Strategic Holdings. His hands went still on the keyboard. Lauren. She leaned in. What is it? They built a lock. Owen stepped forward. That could be standard licensing protection. Malcolm opened the metadata and put the activation certificate on the screen with the payment trigger attached to the recovery agreement. Standard protection doesn't disable a client's own backups and then charge $30 million to give them back. Lauren felt the blood leave her face. Can you stop it? I already isolated the trigger, but I need the original server logs before I touch anything else. If we fix this without preserving the trail, he'll call the whole thing a misunderstanding. Grant came through the doors as if he had heard his name through the wall. You have no authority to inspect Apex property. Lauren turned. Northstar is Pioneer property. The patch is protected under our contract. A contract you signed with your brother-in-law. The floor went silent. Grant's expression hardened. Be careful. I was careful for 2 years, Lauren said. That's how you got this far. She ordered security to suspend his credentials and keep him away from the server room. Leon Brooks came up within minutes, and Grant found himself looking at the same guard who had walked Malcolm out 30 days earlier. This time, Leon did not avoid anyone's eyes. This way, Mr. Keller. By 3:30, Malcolm had copied the logs, the license key, the amendment, and every timestamp onto an encrypted drive. Then he started rebuilding what Apex had stripped out. It went slowly because every safeguard he restored touched another damaged layer underneath it. Lauren watched the wall map while he typed, paused, deleted, and tried again. At 4:06, a single green dot appeared outside Wichita. A driver's voice came over dispatch. Route received, moving now. Nobody cheered. They were all afraid it would go away again. Then a second dot turned in Oklahoma and 6 more in Missouri. Warehouse gates started taking manifests. Medical shipments moved. The map softened route by route until motion came back across the whole country, like feeling returning to a limb that had gone numb. Malcolm leaned back only when the last federal convoy got clearance. He looked exhausted rather than triumphant. The system was never too old, he said. It was too important to change without understanding why it worked. 2 days later, the board met in emergency session. Lauren laid out the timeline without decoration, the layoffs, Malcolm's hidden authorship, Grant's undisclosed family connection, the no-bid contract, the licensing lock built to make the outage profitable. Grant argued that Northstar was obsolete and that Malcolm had left the company dependent on undocumented code. Malcolm answered him once. It ran 12 years. Your team had it 30 days. Rebecca Sloan, the board chair, asked Grant why a recovery contract had been drafted before any emergency existed. He talked about strategic readiness and industry practice and executive authority, and each answer came apart under the next document Lauren put on the table. The vote to terminate him was nearly unanimous. Outside counsel referred the evidence to federal investigators, and Apex Meridian was cut out of every Pioneer system before noon. As the meeting broke up, executives who had walked past Malcolm in hallways for a decade came over to shake his hand. Some apologized. Some claimed they had always known he was exceptional. Malcolm accepted all of it and believed about a third. Lauren found him alone by the elevators. "Does it feel different now?" she asked, being seen. Malcolm looked through the glass at the operations floor below. "They see me because everything broke," he said. "I want to know whether they'll see the next person before that happens." 3 days later, she came to his house with an offer. Chief Technology Officer, public authorship of Northstar Core, full authority to rebuild the technical organization, protect internal warnings, and make sure no critical system ever again rested on one invisible employee. Malcolm turned the folder over in his hands. "A title doesn't repair 12 years. "No," Lauren said. "But it gives you this power to fix what comes after them." He asked for the evening. Sophie sat on the kitchen counter while he made grilled cheese. "Are you going back?" "Maybe." "Do you want to?" Malcolm watched the pan. "I don't want them thinking they can hurt somebody and square it with a nicer badge." Sophie considered that for a while. "Then don't go back for the badge," she said. "Go back so they can't do it to somebody else." It was simple enough to get past the place his anger had been guarding. 2 weeks later, Malcolm walked in through the front doors. His new badge carried no barcode under a forgotten title. It read, Malcolm Reed, Chief Technology Officer. He kept the old basement desk. Not as a monument to what had been done to him, but as a reminder that the people who matter most are usually working in rooms the powerful never visit. Every Tuesday, junior staff presented directly to executives. Every major code change required a written explanation of what problem the old logic had been solving. Every warning had an escalation path that no single manager could delete. Denise was promoted to lead compliance. Lauren stood in front of the whole company and named her own failure out loud before she asked anyone else to change. The weeks went by. Northstar held. Lauren started joining Malcolm and Sophie for dinner now and then, never asking for forgiveness faster than they were able to offer it. One evening, the two of them stood on the walkway above the operations floor, watching thousands of green lights crawl across the map. 6 weeks without a failure, Lauren said. That's a company record. Malcolm shook his head. It's not a record. It always worked like this. Nobody ever knew why. Lauren looked at him instead of the map. I know now. Below them, trucks moved through the dark carrying medicine and food and paychecks to people who would never learn how close the whole network came to disappearing. For 12 years, Pioneer had been held together by a man nobody thought was worth asking about. And for the first time, the silence around his work did not mean erasure. It meant trust. If this one got to you, hit subscribe. And tell me in the comments about the person at your job. Everybody overlooks the one who quietly keeps the whole thing standing. I read everyone.